He signed the divorce papers with the same hand he used to shake hands with senators and close billion-dollar deals, without even looking up. Adrian Voss didn't glance at his wife of 5 years as he slid the documents across the mahogany table. Didn't offer a word, didn't flinch, just uncapped his pen, scratched his name across the bottom line, and leaned back in his chair like a man who had just canceled a subscription he'd forgotten he owned. "You can keep the necklace," he said, already scrolling through his phone. "Consider it severance." The room went quiet enough that you could hear the rain starting outside. Celine Ashcroft, soon to no longer carry even that name, picked up the silver necklace from the table. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just closed her fingers around it and stood up slowly, like a woman who had already said everything she needed to say inside the silence of the past 5 years. She walked out of the conference room without looking back. Adrian poured himself a drink. If you've ever been told you weren't worth keeping, stay with this story, because what happens next will shake you to your core. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like on this video. Tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go. The courthouse plaza smelled like wet concrete and exhaust fumes, the kind of afternoon that makes a city feel small and indifferent. Celine stood at the top of the steps pulling on her coat, a gray wool thing she'd owned for 6 years, practical and unremarkable, which was more or less how Adrian had described her to his friends at the Hargrove Club fundraiser 2 winters ago. She hadn't been meant to hear it. She heard it anyway. She had almost reached the bottom step when the sound hit. Not thunder. Something lower. More deliberate. The rotors came in from the north, cutting through the cloud cover like a blade through tissue paper. People on the plaza stopped walking. A woman dropped her coffee. A courier on a bicycle nearly went over his handlebars trying to see what was above him. The helicopter was matte black, unmarked, military grade, the kind of aircraft you don't see unless someone very specifically wants you to see it. It descended in a straight vertical drop, no circling, no hesitation, landing dead center in the open plaza between the courthouse fountain and the row of media vans that had been parked there covering a completely unrelated city council hearing. Cameras swung. Reporters grabbed their microphones. 2 police officers stepped forward and then immediately stepped back when the helicopter's doors opened and men began climbing out. 12 of them. Then 16. Then more. They wore charcoal suits, every one of them. No weapons visible, but their stillness had that particular quality. The kind that comes from people who don't need to display what they're carrying because they've never once had to prove it. They formed 2 parallel lines extending from the helicopter door outward, like a corridor built from human bodies, and they did it without a single spoken command. Celine had stopped on the bottom step. Her hand rested on the railing. She hadn't moved. The last figure stepped out of the helicopter. He was tall, not in an exaggerated way, but in the way that made the space around him organize itself differently, like furniture rearranging without being touched. He wore no tie. His collar was open 1 button, which on any other man might have read as careless. On him it read as a man who had stopped needing to perform formality for anyone a long time ago. His hair was dark and cut close. His jaw was the kind that photographs well in low light. He was, objectively, an arresting presence. But his face wasn't set in arrogance. It was set in something more complicated than that. It was set in grief that had been worn smooth by years of being carried. He walked through the corridor his men had formed, walked past the reporters, walked past the police, walked past the city councilwoman who happened to be exiting the courthouse behind Celine and who pressed herself against the stone wall like she was trying to become part of it. He stopped at the bottom of the courthouse steps. And then Cassian Draven, whose name did not appear in any public record, whose photograph had never been published in any newspaper, whose existence was something the FBI's Organized Crime Division discussed in tones usually reserved for natural disasters, went down on one knee. Right there on the wet concrete, in front of the cameras, in front of the city. "My queen," he said, and his voice was quiet enough that it barely carried over the wind. "It's time to come home." The cameras caught all of it. They also caught Adrian Voss standing 30 feet away at the top of the courthouse steps with his new fiancée, Vanessa Hale's hand in his champagne-colored pocket square perfectly arranged, his expression doing something it had possibly never done in 43 years of strategic, calculated living. Collapsing. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He told himself it was the noise. The city feeds had picked up the footage before he'd even made it back to his car. And by 8 o'clock, it was on 3 cable networks, then 6, then every platform that existed. By 10, his publicist had called 11 times and stopped leaving messages. By midnight, the story had been shared 400,000 times, and the comment sections were doing what comment sections do, which is locate the most humiliating possible angle on a situation and illuminate it from every direction simultaneously. He sat in the study of his penthouse, 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of view that cost you more than most people earn in a decade. And he stared at his phone and told himself the tight feeling in his chest was irritation, not fear. Irritation. He pulled up the footage again, watched Cassian Draven kneel on the wet concrete like a man who had been waiting years for the right moment and had simply been patient enough to let it arrive. Watched Celine, his quiet, small, unremarkable Celine, who ironed her own clothes and drove a 2019 Civic and brought home wildflowers from the farmer's market every Saturday. Watched her look at this man with an expression Adrian had never once seen on her face in 5 years of marriage. Recognition. Not surprise. Not fear. Recognition. Like a person stepping back into a room they'd always known. She'd reached out and touched Cassian's shoulder as he stood. Just a brief contact, 2 fingers through the fabric of his jacket. And something in his posture had shifted. Not softened exactly, but settled. Like a thing that had been held at tension for a very long time had finally been allowed to release. Adrian closed the video, opened it again, closed it. He poured 2 fingers of scotch and didn't drink it. His assistant, Marcus, had sent a summary at 11:15 p.m. Draven, East Coast, significant, call me before you make any moves. Marcus was not a person who used words like significant loosely. Adrian had hired him precisely because he understood that understatement, in the world they operated in, was a form of alarm. He didn't call Marcus. Instead, he opened his laptop and started searching, the way civilians search, through news archives, through LinkedIn connections, through the fractured public record of a name that, now that he was looking for it, appeared to generate an almost perfectly clean absence. No articles, no court records, no photographs. A handful of vague references in financial journalism to a private logistics firm headquartered in Luxembourg, and one brief mention in a 2019 Interpol summary that had since been partially redacted. Cassian Draven didn't exist publicly, which meant someone had spent a great deal of money making sure of that. Adrian sat back. The tight feeling in his chest moved lower, settling somewhere near his stomach. He thought about the 5 years. About the woman who had cooked dinner for him on Tuesday nights and asked quiet questions about his day and never pushed when he gave her half answers. Who had walked into rooms full of people who wore her as background and done so without apparent complaint. Who had read paperback novels in the evenings while he worked at the desk across the room and sometimes made him tea he didn't ask for and left it at his elbow without comment. He thought about how thoroughly he had misread all of it. The scotch was still sitting on the desk, untouched, when his phone lit up with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He let it ring. It rang again immediately after. And again. He answered. Mr. Voss? The voice was male, level, professional in the way that suggested the person on the other end had never once raised it. My name isn't important. What's important is that you understand the following. Effective tomorrow morning, your financing with Meridian Capital will be terminated. I'd recommend sleeping well tonight, because the next several days are going to require your full attention. The line went dead. Adrian sat very still for a moment. Then he called Marcus. Marcus answered on the first ring, which told Adrian everything he needed to know about how seriously his assistant was taking this. Meridian Capital, Adrian said. I know. A pause, the sound of papers. Also Harwick Partners. And there's a rumor, and I want to stress it's only a rumor right now, but it's coming from 3 separate sources, that the Delmore Group is reconsidering the Q4 infrastructure deal. That's 40% of my operating capital. Yes. Marcus, I know, Adrian. The silence between them lasted long enough that the city outside the window seemed to fill it. Sirens somewhere, distant, the normal ambient noise of a metropolis that didn't know or care that one of its prominent citizens was currently watching the architecture of a decade's worth of deals begin to crack. Is this connected to? Everything is connected to what happened this afternoon, Marcus said, quietly and without pleasure. Get some sleep. Or don't. But don't make any calls tonight. Don't reach out to anyone. Whatever you're about to do, don't. Adrian didn't sleep. By morning, 3 things had happened that Marcus hadn't predicted. The first was that Harwick Partners didn't just pause the deal. They terminated the relationship entirely, citing a clause in their agreement that allowed them to exit any partnership where the principal party was subject to material reputational risk. The phrase had been buried in page 47 of a contract Adrian had signed 3 years ago on what he remembered as a particularly good Tuesday. The second was that 2 journalists showed up at his building's lobby before 7 a.m., not for a statement about the divorce, but with questions about his business practices. Specific questions, the kind that suggested someone had handed them a dossier. The third was Vanessa. She called him at 6:45, her voice carrying that particular compressed quality it got when she was managing herself very carefully in order not to say something she couldn't take back. People are asking me things, she said. What kind of things? About us. About how long? A pause. About whether I knew about who she was. Did you? The silence went on a beat too long. Of course not. Adrian believed her. He wasn't certain he should, but he did. Vanessa Hale was calculating in ways he'd always respected and occasionally found useful. She was a woman who had built her social position with the careful attention of an architect. But she wasn't a liar. She was simply someone who had always operated under the assumption that the world held no surprises she couldn't manage. She was finding out, as Adrian was finding out, that this assumption had a shelf life. Stay home today, he told her. Don't talk to anyone. Adrian, Vanessa, please, she hung up. He stood at his window and watched the city come alive below him. The delivery trucks, the early commuters, the normal grinding machinery of a morning. And he thought about Celine walking out of the courthouse, the way she hadn't cried. He had expected her to cry. He had, in some part of himself he didn't examine closely, depended on it. Depended on the small collapse of composure that would have confirmed his version of who she was. The version that required her to need him more than he needed her, that required her smallness to justify his dismissal. She hadn't given him that. She had walked out like a woman who had already closed the account, like someone who had made peace with the ending before he'd even gotten around to writing it. It hadn't occurred to him to wonder why. His phone rang. Unknown number again. This time, when he answered, there was no voice, just a sound. The distant, unmistakable rotor thrum of a helicopter. 3 seconds. Then silence. Then the line went dead. He found out her name the same way everyone else did, through a journalist who had clearly been fed the story, cleaned and packaged, by someone who understood exactly how much damage a controlled revelation could do compared to a messy one. The piece ran online at 9 a.m. By 9:15, his phone had become an object he could no longer look at directly. Celine Ashcroft Voss, identified as Seraphine Draven, sole female heir of Draven Criminal Enterprise. The article was thorough, sourced, included documents Adrian had never seen and couldn't have accessed. It walked through Seraphine Draven's early life, the compound in Connecticut, the private education, the immersion in a world built on violence and structured like a corporation, and then traced the deliberate erasure of that identity when she was 24, 18 months before she appeared in Adrian's life as a woman named Celine, who worked part-time at an architectural preservation nonprofit and made very good pasta. She had wanted to disappear. The article made that clear without sentimentality. She had watched the world she grew up in consume people, including people she loved, and she had decided with the clarity of someone who has lived inside something long enough to see its total shape, that she wanted no part of it. She had wanted to be loved for nothing, no name, no inheritance, no power, just herself. Adrian read the piece twice. His coffee went cold beside him. He was aware, somewhere at the back of his mind, that Marcus was calling again and that he should answer. He was aware that outside his window, the city was continuing its ordinary business, with no reference whatsoever to the fact that the ground had just shifted under him in ways he was only beginning to measure. He put the phone down. He thought about the evening. It must have been 2 years ago, maybe 2.5, when they'd been at the Hargrove dinner, the annual thing where the city's prominent families performed their prominence at each other for 4 hours over expensive food. He had been drinking and feeling expansive, and he had said something. He couldn't remember now the exact phrasing, only the general shape of it. Something about Celine's ordinary life before all this. A reference to her nonprofit work, her modest background, her lack of any particular distinction. He'd said it to get a laugh. He'd gotten one. She had been standing 6 feet away and she had heard every word and she had said nothing. Just picked up her wine glass and turned slightly toward the window. He had not at the time considered what that silence contained. He was considering it now. The phone rang again. This time it was a number he recognized, a number he hadn't seen in 3 years, belonging to a man named Gerald Crane, who was his primary contact at the Delmore Group, and who had, until approximately 18 hours ago, been one of Adrian's most reliable business allies. He answered, "Gerald, I'm going to make this brief because my lawyers have told me to make it brief." Gerald's voice was the texture of a man who has not slept and is operating on anxiety and strong coffee. The Delmore partnership is terminated effective close of business today. The Q4 infrastructure deal will not proceed. I'm very sorry, Adrian. I genuinely am. But there are forces at work here that are outside anything I'm willing to put my name next to. Gerald, if you could just tell me, I can't. I genuinely cannot. I will tell you one thing, off the record, as someone who has known you for 11 years. A long pause. The woman you divorced yesterday? I would have given anything to have spent 5 years next to someone like that. You had no idea what you had. The line went dead. Adrian set the phone on the table face down, stood up, walked to the window, pressed his palm flat against the glass, and looked out at the city he had spent 20 years building himself into. He had known, in an abstract way, that the world was larger and more complicated than the version of it he operated in. He had understood, theoretically, that there were systems beneath the systems he could see. He had simply never had reason to believe that any of them intersected with the quiet woman who left tea at his elbow on Tuesday evenings. He had been, in every meaningful sense, catastrophically wrong. His reflection looked back at him from the glass, tailored jacket, 43 years old, a man who had been very good at understanding what the world valued and positioning himself accordingly. He had never, in all of it, understood that the most valuable thing in his immediate life had been sitting across the breakfast table reading a paperback. He turned away from the window. He did not know yet that the worst was still coming. He did not know yet that Vanessa was about to disappear. He did not know that the conspiracy unraveling around him was far older than his divorce, far deeper than his ruined investments, and that the woman he had dismissed as unremarkable was the only person on earth who might be willing, for reasons that had nothing to do with him, to pull him back from the edge of something he couldn't yet see clearly enough to be properly afraid of. He just stood in his penthouse, looking at a phone full of missed calls, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific vertigo of a man who has just realized he is not, and perhaps never was, the most important person in his own story. The rain had started again outside. Somewhere across the city, in a building Adrian had no address for, Celine Ashcroft, Seraphine Draven, was sitting across a table from her brother, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, and she was saying, "Don't touch him, Cassian." And Cassian was looking at her with the expression of a man who has spent years doing terrible things for people he loves, and who is only now beginning to wonder if love requires him to stop. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Let him feel it first." Cassian set his coffee cup down on the table with the careful precision of a man who was choosing not to do something else with his hands. He had been standing at the window for the last 40 seconds. Celine had counted, the way she always counted silences with her brother, because the length of his silences had always been the most accurate measure of how close he was to doing something irreversible. 40 seconds was moderate. 40 seconds meant he was still listening to her. "Not yet," she said again, quieter this time, because she'd learned years ago that repetition with Cassian didn't require volume. It required patience. "You keep saying that like there's going to be a yet." He turned from the window. His face was composed in the way that expensive training and long practice produce, surface stillness over something that ran deep and fast underneath. "There's no yet, Seraphine. There's a timeline, and we're on it, and he put himself on it the moment he signed a divorce paper." She kept her voice even. "That's all he did. He humiliated you in front of... He humiliated himself." She picked up her own cup. The coffee had gone cold and she drank it anyway, because she had spent 5 years training herself not to require things to be exactly right before she could function. He just doesn't understand that yet. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. He had her same coloring, dark hair, eyes that read as gray in low light, and something closer to green in direct sun. But where her face had learned softness as a kind of armor, his had gone the other direction entirely. Hard lines. A jaw that photographers in a different life would have found compelling. He sat down across from her. "The accounts," he said. "I know. Meridian, Harwick, the Delmore infrastructure deal." "I know, Cassian. That wasn't my instruction. That was Lucian moving pieces." A pause, brief and weighted. "I told him to monitor, not to touch." Celine set the cup down slowly. "What?" "I told Lucien to run passive surveillance on Voss's holdings. Flag anything that looked like it might complicate your exit. Basic protocol." His fingers tapped once on the table. "The financial pressure, the calls to his investors, the terminations. That wasn't my order." The room felt different suddenly. Not smaller. Different. Like the air pressure had shifted by a fraction that the body registers before the mind catches up. "Then who gave it?" Celine asked. Cassian didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. "You're not sure," she said. "I'm not sure it wasn't Lucian acting on what he thought I wanted." He paused. "I'm also not sure it was." Celine looked at her brother across the table, this man she had grown up beside, who had taught her to read a room before she could read a book, who had cried exactly once in her memory and never spoken of it. And she felt the old familiar weight of living inside a world where nothing was ever simply what it appeared to be. "I need you to pull him back," she said. "Whatever he's doing, whatever he thinks he's doing, pull him back, Cassian. Adrian is not a threat. He's a variable. He's a man who made a stupid mistake and is now watching his life fall apart." She stood up, moved to the window he'd vacated. The city was gray and wet below her. She'd missed this skyline in spite of everything. Let him fall apart on his own terms. We don't need to accelerate it. And if the acceleration isn't about Voss? She turned. Cassian's expression had shifted, barely, a degree, but she'd been reading him her entire life. There was something underneath the surface now, not quite concern. Something more operational than concern. Something that meant he had information he was deciding whether to share. "Tell me," she said. "There's been movement." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers laced. 3 weeks ago, before the divorce, before any of this, someone ran a search on the Draven financial architecture. Not the surface structure, the actual architecture. The Luxembourg accounts. The transit routing through the Cayman entities. Celine went very still. "Someone outside the organization?" she asked. "Someone with enough access to know where to look." His eyes were steady on hers. "Which limits the list considerably." She understood what he wasn't saying. The list of people who knew the Draven financial architecture, the real one, the one that would take a federal task force 3 years to map if they started today, was short. It was short, and it was internal, and it meant that whatever was moving around them was not moving from the outside in. It was already inside. "When were you going to tell me this?" Her voice was quieter than she intended. "I'm telling you now." "Cassian, I didn't want you walking back into this." He said it flatly, without apology but without cruelty either. "You left because you wanted out. I was trying to get you out clean." "I didn't leave to be protected." She crossed back to the table. "I left because I made a choice. That's different." She pulled out the chair and sat down, and this time she held his gaze without blinking. "Who knows I'm back?" "The men at the courthouse, my inner circle." A pause. "Lucien." The name sat between them. Celine didn't say anything for a moment. She thought about Lucien Moreau, had been trying not to think about Lucien Moreau since she'd stepped off the helicopter, actually, in the same way you try not to think about a weight you can feel shifting in a bag you're carrying. She had known Lucien for most of her life. He was 8 years older than her and had been with Cassian since before she was old enough to understand what Cassian did for a living. He was precise and quiet and intensely loyal, and those 3 qualities together in a person should have been reassuring. They had never, for reasons she couldn't have fully articulated, been reassuring. "I want access to the surveillance logs," she said. "Everything from the last 6 weeks." Cassian nodded, once. I'll have them sent. And I want a separate channel, just us. Nothing through Lucienne. He looked at her for a beat longer than necessary. Then, already done, she exhaled. She hadn't known she was holding her breath. Adrian found out about Vanessa at 2:17 in the afternoon from a single text message sent from her personal phone to his. 3 words, no punctuation, no context. They took me. He read it 4 times. His brain kept offering him alternative interpretations, the way a mind under stress will reach for anything that costs less than the truth. And each alternative collapsed almost immediately, and he was left with the 3 words and the timestamp and the understanding that his world, which had already been deconstructing itself steadily for the last 18 hours, had just taken a step that no amount of financial recovery or reputation management was going to address. He called her back. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Same. He texted, "Where are you? Are you hurt? Call me now." Nothing. He stood in the middle of his study with the phone in his hand and felt the specific sensation. He had never felt it before, not like this, of a situation having moved entirely beyond his ability to manage it. He was a man who had spent his adult life constructing systems of control, financial, social, relational. He understood leverage. He understood the architecture of power. He had operated inside that architecture for 20 years and had been, by any measurable standard, very good at it. He had no architecture for this. Marcus arrived at the penthouse 20 minutes later, letting himself in with the key Adrian had given him 3 years ago for building emergencies. He took one look at Adrian, still standing, still holding the phone, having apparently not moved, and his expression went through several adjustments before settling on something professionally neutral. "Sit down," Marcus said. "I don't want to sit down. Adrian, sit down. Sit." He sat down. Marcus pulled up a chair across from him. He was 51 years old, had worked with Adrian since the early days, had the kind of face that communicated information efficiently and without drama. Right now, his face was communicating that the information he was carrying was not information he was enjoying. "She sent the text from her phone," Adrian said. 3 words. "They took me." Then nothing. "I know. I had a monitoring flag on her number." At Adrian's look, Marcus shook his head slightly. "Precautionary. After last night. I'm sorry I didn't tell you." "Who's they?" "That's the question." Marcus set his tablet on the coffee table between them. "Her building security footage from this morning. She left at approximately 8:45. Got into what appears to be a car service vehicle, black SUV, standard size. Nothing that would have flagged alarm. She was on her phone when she got in." He paused. "The vehicle's plates don't belong to any registered car service. The plates are clean, but they're cycling. Someone switched them within the last 48 hours. "Professionals?" Adrian said. "Yes." "Who?" He stopped. Reorganized. "Is this connected to—" "I don't know." Marcus said it with a directness that meant he genuinely didn't, which was unusual enough to be its own form of alarm. "The Draven organization has no history of this kind of action. They don't take civilians. It's bad for business, and it's bad for reputation, and they've maintained both for 30 years by operating with a certain discipline." He chose the word carefully. "This doesn't fit their pattern." "Then who does it fit?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain had picked up again, sheeting against the windows with the kind of consistency that makes a city feel like it's retreating inside itself. "There are other organizations," Marcus said carefully, "who have been watching the Draven network for years, looking for vulnerabilities, a moment of internal distraction." He paused. "Seraphine Draven returning publicly would be significant. It would signal transition, and in a transition, people look for leverage." Adrian stared at him. "They took Vanessa because of Celine." "That's my working hypothesis." Marcus's voice stayed level. "Someone wants access to the Draven financial network, and they've decided that the fastest route to that access is through someone who might be perceived as having emotional leverage over a party adjacent to the situation." "Me," Adrian said. "You." The word landed with a weight Adrian hadn't anticipated. Not because he didn't understand the logic. He did, even now, even in the fog of the last 18 hours, he could follow the logic. But because following it to its end meant confronting something he had been avoiding since he'd read that newspaper article this morning. He was not a target because of anything he had done. He was a target because of his proximity to a woman he had spent 5 years failing to see. And Vanessa, impeccably social, strategically connected, entirely uninvolved in any of this, was somewhere in a black SUV with cycled plates because she had been standing next to him on the courthouse steps at the wrong moment. "I need to find her," he said. "Yes." "The police are not your first call." Marcus said it quietly, but with a finality that closed the door on that option. The moment this becomes official, it becomes public. And the moment it becomes public, whoever has her knows every move being made to find her. In a situation like this, public is a liability. "I know." Adrian pressed his hands flat on his thighs. He could feel his heartbeat in his palms. "Then what's the first call?" Marcus looked at him steadily. Adrian understood. He looked away, looked back. "No," he said. "Adrian, I'm not going to her. I'm not asking her for anything. She has every reason in the world not to." "She's the only one who can navigate this," Marcus said, with the particular patience of a man who has already had this argument in his own head and reached the only conclusion the facts support. "Whatever you think of the situation, whatever she thinks of you, Cashin Draven's organization is the only entity in this city with the resources and the street-level intelligence to locate Vanessa before whoever has her decides she's no longer useful." He paused. "You know I'm right." Adrian knew he was right. He sat with it for a long moment. The full dimensions of it, the humiliation and the fear, and underneath both of those, something quieter and more corrosive, something that felt almost like shame, not the performative shame of a public failure. Something more interior, something about a woman who had asked nothing of him for 5 years and gotten exactly what she'd asked for, which was to say nothing at all, and who was now the only lifeline available to him. "She's going to say no," he said. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but she's going to hear you first." He called the number Marcus had. He didn't know how Marcus had it and didn't ask. It rang twice. A man answered, not Cashin, someone else, voice flat, professionally neutral, the way soldiers answer phones when they're doing security work for people with resources. "I need to speak with Seraphine," Adrian said. A pause. "Who's calling?" He closed his eyes briefly. "Her ex-husband." Another pause, longer. Then the line went quiet. Not dead, just held, and Adrian stood at his window and counted the seconds. The way Celine had counted Cassian's silences, and tried to remember the last time he had been in a position where he had no choice but to wait for someone else to decide. He couldn't remember. He didn't think it had happened before. 40 seconds. 60. Then her voice. Not warm, not cold, just even. "Adrian." His name in her mouth sounded different than it used to. He couldn't have explained how, just different, like something that had once been familiar had been set down and picked up again by different hands. "Vanessa is gone," he said. No preamble. He'd thought about how to begin this conversation for the last 40 minutes, and had concluded that any form of approach other than direct was a form of disrespect that the situation couldn't sustain. "I got a text from her at 2:17, 3 words. They took me." She's not answering her phone. Marcus has footage of her getting into a vehicle that was professionally prepared. The plates were cycled. This isn't random. Silence on her end. He could hear very faintly the sound of another voice, male, questioning. And then Celine's hand must have covered the phone for a moment, because the sound became muffled and then cleared. "Where are you?" she asked. "Penthouse." "Stay there." A pause. "Don't call anyone else. Don't call the police. Don't call anyone you think might be able to help, because right now you don't know who any of those people actually work for. Celine, I'll be in contact in an hour." Her voice hadn't changed in texture. Still even, still measured. But there was something underneath it now, a quality of attention, of something shifting from standing position into something else. "And Adrian?" "Yeah." "Whatever you think this is, it isn't." The pause before the next sentence was barely a second. "This started before yesterday, before the divorce, before any of it. I need you to understand that before we talk, because if you walk into this thinking it's about you, you're going to make it harder for everyone." She ended the call. Adrian stood holding the phone. Marcus was watching him from across the room. "She'll help," Adrian said, mostly to himself. Marcus didn't look relieved. He looked like a man who understood that help, in a situation like this one, was not the same thing as safety. What did she say? She said this started before the divorce. Adrian set the phone down on the table. Before all of it. Marcus was quiet. Did you know that? Adrian looked at him. Marcus took a breath, set his own phone on the table beside Adrian's. There's something I should have told you this morning. He said it carefully, the way a person speaks when they're reconfiguring the order of a disclosure that has become unavoidably necessary. I've been running background since last night, on the divorce proceedings specifically. The timeline of the filing, the court date, they moved faster than they should have. Normally, there's a 60-day administrative window between filing and hearing. Your divorce was heard in 11 days. Adrian stared at him. That's not possible. It's not standard, but it's possible, with the right clerk and the right... Marcus paused. Someone wanted that divorce to happen on a specific date, in a specific public venue. The courthouse plaza. The cameras. The helicopter landing in perfect range of every media van in the city. It was staged, Adrian said slowly. The whole thing. Not your decision to divorce. That was yours. Marcus's voice was very careful now. But the circumstances around it, the speed, the venue, the timing, those were organized. By who? That, Marcus said, is the question I've been trying to answer all day. And the answer I keep arriving at doesn't make sense to me yet. But it involves someone inside the Draven organization with enough access to move administrative paperwork and enough motive to need Seraphine's return to be very public, very fast. The rain against the glass. The city below. Indifferent. Adrian Voss sat down on the edge of his desk and looked at the surface of it. The clean lines, the organized stacks, the architecture of a life built on the assumption that he understood where the walls were, and felt, with a clarity that had taken him 43 years and one catastrophic miscalculation to arrive at, that he had been a piece on someone else's board. Not Cassian's, not Celine's. Someone else's entirely. And somewhere in this city, he couldn't trace, Vanessa Hale, who had wanted nothing more complicated than a comfortable life with a powerful man, was learning the same lesson in a considerably more dangerous classroom. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No text. Just coordinates, and a single line beneath them. She has 6 hours. After that, the question changes. Adrian stared at the screen. His hands were not steady. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Voss was genuinely, completely afraid. Not of losing money, not of losing reputation, not of public failure or professional ruin, but of something simpler and more absolute, of being responsible for a death he couldn't undo. Inside a game he had never known he was playing, and of having to ask the woman he'd spent 5 years dismissing to be the one who pulled him back from it. He picked up the phone and called the number Celine had called from. It rang once. "I got a message," he said when she answered. "Coordinates in a 6-hour window." His voice was steadier than he felt. "Tell me what you need from me." And across the city, in a building he had no address for, Seraphine Draven looked at her brother over the edge of her phone and said nothing for 3 full seconds. Just looked at him with the expression of a woman who has just confirmed something she had been hoping to be wrong about. Then she said to Adrian, "Send me the coordinates." And to Cassian, lowering the phone slightly, she said in a voice that had shed every last remnant of the quiet woman from the courthouse steps. "It's Lucien." Cassian's face didn't move, but his hand went to the inside of his jacket. And that, the slow, deliberate reach, the absolute absence of surprise in his eyes, told Celine everything about how long her brother had already known, and said nothing, and waited, and that the hour of waiting was now finished. Cassian's hand stayed inside his jacket for exactly 4 seconds. Then he withdrew it slowly, empty, and set both palms flat on the table in front of him. A gesture Celine recognized from childhood, from the years when he'd been learning to govern the thing inside him that had no clean name. It meant, "I am choosing not to act yet." It did not mean, "I have decided not to act." "How long?" she asked him. "I'm not certain it's him." "Cassian." "I said I'm not certain." He stood up, moved to the window again, which was apparently where he needed to be when information was rearranging itself into shapes he didn't want. There were irregularities. 3 months ago. Financial routing that moved through channels Lucien manages exclusively. Small amounts. Nothing that would flag an audit. But the pattern... He stopped. "The pattern looked like someone building something," Celine said. He didn't turn around. Yes. And you didn't tell me. You weren't here. I'm here now. She kept her voice flat, kept the anger behind it, because the anger wasn't useful yet, and she knew it, and he knew it, and both of them were operating from the same training, the same childhood education in the discipline of not letting feeling make the first move. Send the coordinates to your tactical team, and get me a car. You're not going into the field. Get me a car, Cassian. He turned. His expression did the thing it rarely did, cracked at the edges, just slightly, in a way that wasn't anger and wasn't grief, but was something that lived between them. You've been out for 5 years. You don't know what's changed on the ground. Then brief me on the way. She picked up her phone. Adrian's message was still on the screen. The coordinates, the timestamp, the 6-hour window counting down with the indifference of all clocks everywhere. Vanessa Hale is in a building I can find faster than your team can clear for entry, because whoever took her wants me to come. They sent those coordinates to Adrian because they knew he'd call me, which means the location is designed for my arrival, not yours. She looked at him steadily. So either you put me in a car with people I trust, or I call a cab. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his own phone and made a call. 1 sentence. Bring the Suburban around, full detail. He ended it. Looked at her. You stay behind the perimeter until we've cleared... Cassian. Until we've cleared the first 2 entry points, he finished. Then you come in. It wasn't what she wanted, it was what she was going to get. Fine, she said. He was already at the door. Then he stopped, hand on the frame, not looking at her. The divorce papers moved through Judge Harold Wren's clerk. Wren has been on Lucian's payroll for 6 years. A pause. I found that out this morning. The silence that followed was the particular kind that forms when a person is recalibrating their understanding of how long they've been wrong about something. 6 years, Celine said. Yes. So when I was still with Adrian, Lucian knew who you were, where you were. Cassian's hand tightened on the doorframe. The whole time. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that yet. It was too large, and the next 6 hours were too immediate. And she had learned a long time ago that you could only carry one weight at a time if you wanted to carry it far enough to matter. Go, she said. He went. She stood alone in the room for exactly 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone, called Adrian back, and said, Don't move. Don't open the door for anyone until my people arrive. And when they do, you follow their instructions exactly, not approximately, exactly. Understood, he said. His voice had the quality of a man who has stopped performing composure and was simply, rawly trying to hold it together. She found that more tolerable than the version of him she'd known. She ended the call and walked out. The Suburban smelled like leather and gun oil, which was the smell of her childhood, and Celine sat in the back between 2 men whose names she'd been given once and didn't need to use and watched the city scroll past the rain-dark windows. Cassian was in the front passenger seat. He hadn't said anything since they'd left the building. His second, a man named Reeves, compact, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by things years ago, turned from the seat beside the driver and passed a tablet back to her. Coordinates put it at the Callaway Terminal, old freight processing facility on the South Harbor. It's been decommissioned for 3 years. New ownership transferred 8 months ago through a shell company. He paused. Shell company traces back through 4 intermediary entities to a holding registered in Malta. Malta, Cassian said, without inflection. The Vanex Syndicate maintains 3 Maltese registrations for shell operations, Reeves said. We flagged intersections before. Never direct contact. Celine looked up from the tablet. Vanek. Eastern European operation. They've been pushing west for 2 years, freight logistics, port access, financial routing. Reeves's voice stayed level. The Draven network controls 6 of the 11 major East Coast port terminals. If someone wanted to crack that open, they'd need the financial architecture, Celine said. The routing codes, the trust structures underneath the logistics companies. Yes. Which Vanessa Hale doesn't have. No. She looked at Cassian's profile. He was watching the road. She's a key, she said slowly. Not for what she knows. For what someone thinks she can get to. Through you, Cassian said. Through me. She set the tablet on her knee. The coordinates on its screen pulsed with a small blue marker. The Callaway Terminal, South Harbor, 7 minutes ahead of them. Vanek doesn't know the architecture, but they know I grew up inside it. They think taking someone close to my situation forces my hand. She paused. Which means someone told them how to construct that pressure. Cassian turned his head. Just slightly. Just enough to confirm she'd arrived at the same place he had. Someone told them about the divorce, she said. About the timeline. About Adrian. The SUV moved through a yellow light, the rain thick enough now that the windshield wipers were barely keeping pace. Lucien has been in contact with Vanek, Cassian said quietly. I couldn't prove it this morning. I can now. He reached into his jacket. The same reach as before, but this time he came out with a phone, not a weapon. He handed it back to her. That came in 20 minutes ago, from a source I've had embedded in Vanek's financial operation for 14 months. She took the phone. Read the message on the screen. It was brief. It was specific. It contained a wire transfer record, date stamped 8 weeks ago, an amount in the low 7 figures, routing from a Maltese entity to a numbered account in Zurich that Celine recognized because she had, 12 years ago, helped Cassian set it up. The account belonged to Lucien Moreau. She handed the phone back without speaking. Her hands were steady. She was aware of them being steady in the way you're aware of something that is costing you effort, and she decided not to examine the cost right now. He's been selling us, she said. He's been selling access, Cassian said. There's a difference. Is there? Cassian didn't answer. Adrian was standing at his window when the two men arrived. They were polite in the way that suggests politeness is a choice made from a position of authority, not supplication, and they swept the penthouse with a thoroughness that told him they had done this before, frequently, and that his assessment of the space as secure was not a conclusion they were willing to accept without verification. The taller one, he didn't offer a name, handed Adrian a vest and said, "Put this on." "I'm not leaving the building," Adrian said. "Put it on anyway." He put it on. Marcus had his laptop open at the desk, running his own searches through channels Adrian didn't ask about. His face the particular expression of a man who is discovering that his professional competence, which he had always considered substantial, has limits he is actively mapping in real time. "The wire," Marcus said, not looking up. "The one they sent to your Meridian contact. I traced it. I thought it was Draven." "It's not Draven." He paused. "It's routed through a structure I've seen before. 2 years ago, I flagged a similar pattern when we were vetting a logistics partner for the harbor project." He looked up. "We didn't take the deal. Do you remember why?" Adrian thought. "You said the back-end structure was too clean. Too clean for a legitimate operation. Too sophisticated for casual fraud." Marcus closed the laptop. "The same structure is being used to pressure your investors, which means whoever is pulling your financial architecture apart is not doing it because of the divorce, and is not doing it as a favor to Seraphine." He looked at Adrian directly. "They're doing it to keep you isolated. No resources, no allies, no leverage. A man with no leverage is a man who reaches for whatever rope is available." "They wanted me to call Celine," Adrian said. "They wanted you to call Celine," Marcus confirmed. The vest was heavier than Adrian expected. He could feel it across his shoulders, across his chest. The weight of it, the blunt physical reality of being in a situation where this was a necessary object. Then my going to her, maybe exactly what someone needs to happen. Marcus stood. "I don't think Seraphine is the target. I think she's the mechanism. Whatever access they're trying to reach, they need her to move toward it voluntarily, under pressure, with compromised judgment." He paused. "Which is why they chose Vanessa." Adrian looked at his hands. The vest made his breathing feel different, more conscious, like he had to think about each inhalation. "I'm the pressure," he said. "I'm what moves her." "You're what they think moves her." Marcus's voice was careful. "Whether you actually do is a different question." The building's lobby called up to confirm that a vehicle had arrived. Adrian looked at Marcus. "Come with me," he said. Marcus picked up his jacket. "I was going to regardless." The Callaway terminal was a structure that had once processed 3,000 shipping containers a month, and now processed nothing. A cathedral of rust and silence. Its loading bays sealed with corrugated sheeting, its dock access blocked by chain link that someone had cut and resecured with fresh zip ties, which told Celine everything she needed to know about how recently this location had been prepared. She stood at the perimeter and counted the entry points she could see. 3 visible. Probably 2 she couldn't. Cassian's team moved in standard formation. She watched them from 30 feet back, the way they'd been told to position her, and she tracked the sweep with the muscle memory of a childhood spent being drilled in exactly this kind of spatial awareness by men who believed that knowledge of tactics was not a profession but a survival condition. Reeves materialized at her elbow. 2 heat signatures on the northeast corner, 1 on the upper catwalk, 2 more in what used to be the processing floor. He kept his voice low, his breath steaming in the cold harbor air. 5 total visible. Could be more in the sublevel. Vanessa? Can't isolate. The sublevel is blocking the thermal. He paused. We think she's below. Who's running point inside? Declan. A beat. He's good. I know he's good. I trained him. She looked at the terminal. Rain off the harbor. The smell of brine and rust and the particular cold that comes off open water in November. Tell Cassian I'm going in with the second wave. He said, tell him. Reeves pressed his earpiece and spoke quietly. A pause. Then, he says if you get shot, he's going to be very upset. Tell him I'll keep that in mind. She moved forward. The first 2 entry points cleared fast. Cassian's team was good, better than she'd remembered, which meant he'd spent the 5 years she was gone doing what Cassian always did with time, which was use it to get more dangerous. She came through the second bay door behind Declan, a man in his early 30s with a broken nose that had healed slightly wrong and eyes that moved through space the way good tactical people's eyes do, in constant triangulated assessment. The processing floor was enormous and dark, lit only by the gray light coming through gaps in the roof sheeting and the narrow beams of their flashlights. Old conveyor infrastructure hung overhead. The floor was concrete and rust-stained, and their footsteps, despite their care, produced a sound that the cavernous space multiplied. Someone fired from the upper catwalk. Not at Celine. At the man 2 feet to her left, who dropped and rolled and came up behind a concrete pillar with the efficiency that suggested he'd been shot at before and had strong opinions about it. The shot was wild, high, left, the kind of shot fired by someone who is nervous or inexperienced or both. Don't kill them, Celine said quietly, immediately. We need to talk to them. Declan, from behind his pillar. Ma'am, with respect. I know, don't kill them. Cassian's voice in her earpiece. Celine. I heard the shot. I'm fine. She moved toward the stairwell access. I need whoever is on that catwalk breathing and able to answer questions. The catwalk shooter was neutralized in 40 seconds. Not killed, as instructed, but put down hard by 2 of Cassian's team who came up the east stairwell while the shooter was focused on the west. Celine heard the brief scuffle, heard the specific sound of someone hitting metal grating, heard it stop. The sublevel access was a freight elevator that no longer functioned and a maintenance stairwell that descended 12 feet below the floor. She went down it with Declan ahead of her and another man behind, and at the bottom they found a corridor lit by a single battery-powered work light, and at the end of the corridor a locked door. And behind the locked door, when Declan opened it with the kind of tool that makes locks irrelevant, they found Vanessa Hale. She was sitting on the floor against the far wall with her hands zip-tied in front of her and her mascara tracking down both cheeks and her eyes. When the flashlight hit them, going through the full range of terror to recognition to the specific exhausted relief of someone who has been afraid for several hours and is now fractionally less afraid and doesn't quite trust it yet. She was not alone. There was a man in the room with her. He was seated on a folding chair 5 feet from her, his hands on his knees, his posture composed. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, trim, wearing the kind of suit that costs more than some people's monthly rent. He had, in his eyes, the expression of a man who had already run several calculations and arrived at a conclusion he was prepared to live with. Celine knew him. She had known him since she was 8 years old, and he used to bring her chocolate from the airport when he returned from trips overseas and call her Petite Reine and tell Cassian she was the sharpest mind in the house, which had made Cassian smile in the way that meant he already knew. Lucia Moreau looked at her from across the room and said, with a calmness that was either genuine or the most sophisticated performance she'd ever witnessed, "Hello, Seraphine, I've been waiting for you." She didn't move. Her flashlight held steady on his face. "Where's your team?" she asked. "Gone." He said it simply. "I sent them away 30 minutes ago, when I knew you were coming." A pause. "I wanted to speak with you without an audience." "You wanted to speak with me," she repeated. Her voice was a flat line. "I know how this looks." "Do you?" "I know what Cassian has told you." He leaned forward slightly, elbows to knees, and his voice stayed at the same register. Measured, unhurried, the voice of a man making an argument he has rehearsed but believes. "I know what the wire transfer looks like. I know about the timeline. I've been watching your brother build his case for 3 weeks." A pause. "What I need you to understand is that the case is right about everything except the reason." Celine looked at Vanessa. "Are you hurt?" "No." Vanessa's voice was rough. "No, They didn't touch me. He told them not to." She looked at Lucien with an expression that was equal parts confusion and residual terror. "He's been sitting there for 2 hours." "Waiting," Celine said. "For you," Lucien confirmed. Declan had moved up beside her. She could feel his readiness without looking at him, the particular tension of a trained person waiting for instruction. She held up 2 fingers. "Hold." "Talk," she said to Lucien. He looked at her. He had the eyes she remembered, dark, precise, the eyes of someone who notices everything and files it without visible effort. She had always found them reassuring. She was finding them something else now. "The Vanek wire," he said, "was not payment for access. It was payment for misdirection." He held her gaze steadily. "Vanek has been building toward a move on the Draven network for 2 years. They have an asset inside the organization. Someone who has been feeding them architectural information, routing, accounts, the trust structures underneath the logistics companies." He paused. "It isn't me." "Then who?" Celine asked. "That," Lucien said, "is why I arranged for Vanessa to be brought here, and why I made sure the coordinates would reach you through Adrian." He looked at her with the weariness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. "I needed to get you here, away from Cassian, before I could tell you what I know." The cold in the room had a particular quality, harbor cold, the kind that gets into the joints. Celine felt it in her hands. She kept them still. "You're telling me you staged an abduction, a controlled relocation," he said. "Ms. Hale was never in danger. My people were instructed not to touch her, not to threaten her, and to ensure she was warm and undamaged." He glanced at Vanessa. "I'm sorry for the experience. That's genuine." "Don't apologize to me," Vanessa said sharply. "Just—" She stopped, looked at Celine. "Who is this man?" "Someone I grew up with," Celine said. "Someone who is going to tell me what he knows right now completely without managing what he includes." She looked at Lucien. "And then I'm going to decide whether to call my brother." Lucien nodded. Once, slowly, the way people nod when they've already accepted the terms. "The asset inside the organization," he said. "The person feeding Vanek the architectural information." He looked at her directly. "It's Reeves." The name landed in the room, and Celine's body processed it before her mind did. A physical thing, a drop in her chest, a tightening across her shoulders. Reeves. Who was outside right now? Who had briefed her on the thermal signatures? Who had been at Cassian's right hand for 7 years? "Proof," she said. Lucien reached into his jacket. Slowly, hands visible, the gesture of a man who understands what happens when hands disappear into jackets in rooms like this, and produced a folded document, held it out. She crossed the room and took it. It was a communication log. Encrypted originally, decrypted by someone with the right keys. 14 months of contact between a coded identifier she didn't recognize and a Vanek cutout number that she did, because Cassian had briefed her on it during the drive over. The coded identifier's pattern of contact aligned precisely with Reeves's travel schedule. 3 overseas trips in 14 months. 3 bursts of communication from the Vanek cutout within 48 hours of each trip. She looked up. "Cassian doesn't know," Lucien said. She was already moving. Back toward the door, phone out, thumb on Cassian's direct line. The call connected on the first ring and she said, before he could speak, "Reeves. Right now. Where is he?" A pause, 3 seconds. The worst 3 seconds she had experienced in a very long time. Then Cassian's voice, low and very precise. "He just asked to run a perimeter check. He left my visual 2 minutes ago. Find him, she said. Don't let him reach a phone or a vehicle. Find him right now. She ended the call and turned back to the room. Declan was already on his own comm. Lucian was watching her with the expression of a man who has just handed off a weight he has been carrying alone for longer than anyone should carry anything. How long have you known? She asked him. 8 weeks? He said it with the flatness of someone confessing something they're not proud of. I spent 4 weeks confirming it before I was certain. Then I spent 4 weeks trying to figure out how to tell Cassian that his most trusted operational lieutenant had been compromised without... He stopped. Cassian doesn't always respond well to information he doesn't want. She knew that was true. She had grown up knowing that was true. So you built this, she said. The wire transfer, the abduction, the coordinates to Adrian. A controlled situation where I could get you to hear me without Reeves in the room. He met her eyes. If I'd tried to brief Cassian directly, Reeves would have known within the hour. He's embedded deeply enough to have eyes on Cassian's communications. A pause. I needed someone Reeves wouldn't see coming, someone outside the operational structure. He looked at her steadily. I needed you. Celine stood in the cold sub-level room of a decommissioned terminal with the document still in her hand and a woman she barely knew sitting against the wall watching her. And a man she'd trusted since childhood explaining, with what appeared to be complete sincerity, that he had engineered a kidnapping to protect the organization from a betrayal that had been running for over a year. And what she could not determine, what she was actively, urgently trying to determine, running every available piece of information through every framework she possessed, was whether Lucien was telling the truth, or whether this was the most elegant misdirection she had ever encountered, staged by a man who had known her since childhood, and therefore knew exactly which levers moved her and how far. Her phone buzzed. A message from Cassian. Reeves is gone. Vehicle missing from the south access. He made us. Then 4 seconds later, a second message. There's something else. The terminal. Celine, the terminal is wired. Explosive devices. Someone set charges on the structural columns. We found the first 2. We don't know how many more. She looked up at Lucien. His expression had changed. For the first time since she'd walked through that door, his composure had shifted. Not collapsed, but cracked at the edge, in a way that looked very much like genuine alarm. I didn't know about the charges, he said. She looked at him. Seraphine. His voice had lost the measured quality. I did not know about the charges. And in that moment, in the crack in his voice, in the specific quality of his alarm, in everything she knew and everything she couldn't verify, Celine Draven made the only decision the next 60 seconds allowed her to make. She grabbed Lucien by the arm, reached back for Vanessa, looked at Declan, and said one word, out! And the 4 of them ran. The stairwell was 12 feet of vertical darkness, and they took it fast, Declan first, then Vanessa, who stumbled on the 3rd step and caught herself on the rail with a sound that was half gasp and half controlled fury, then Celine with her hand on Lucien's arm, because she had not yet decided whether he was an asset or a liability, and until she decided he stayed within reach. They came up through the freight floor access, and Celine was already on her comm before her feet hit concrete. All units pull back. Exit the structure, now. All units, now. Cassian's voice came back immediately. We have people on the upper level. Get them out. Charges on the structural columns. Unknown count. Get everyone out right now. A 2-second pause that felt like considerably longer. Then Cassian. Pulling back. South exterior in 90 seconds. Declan had Vanessa by the elbow and was moving her across the processing floor at a pace that her heels, she was still wearing the shoes she'd left her building in that morning, were not designed for. She kicked them off without breaking stride. Celine registered this without comment. It was the kind of adaptation she recognized. The floor was 300 feet of open concrete between them and the South Bay doors, and they covered it at a run, flashlight beams cutting across rust and old machinery and the accumulated stillness of a building that had been emptied and forgotten. Above them, through the gaps in the roof sheeting, the harbor sky was low and dark, the rain coming in at an angle now, cold enough to feel like small impacts on any exposed skin. They were 80 feet from the doors when the first charge detonated. It was not the catastrophic explosion of film and television. It was a sharp, compressed crack from somewhere in the northeast corner of the structure. The sound of a shaped charge doing exactly what it was designed to do, which was destroy a specific load-bearing point rather than announce itself dramatically. The floor didn't shake. The building groaned, which was worse. "Move," Declan said, and he didn't say it loudly. He said it with the particular compression of a person who is managing their own adrenaline while everyone else's is spiking. Celine moved. The South Bay doors were industrial roll-up, sealed with a chain and padlock that Declan addressed with a bolt cutter from his jacket. In the time it took Celine to position herself and Lucien against the doorframe, the chain dropped. The door went up manually, Declan and Celine on the handle, the thing grinding upward with the reluctance of machinery that hadn't moved in 3 years, and the cold harbor air came through like a hand pressing flat against her face. They went through. Outside was controlled chaos in the specific way that Cassian's operations always were, chaotic to the untrained eye, completely structured beneath the surface. 3 vehicles had repositioned to the south access. Men were moving in from the perimeter. Cassian was standing 40 feet from the building's exterior wall, and when he saw Celine emerge, he crossed the distance to her in long, fast strides that were the closest she'd seen him come to running in years. He looked at her face. He looked at Lucien. His expression went through several things in rapid sequence and settled on nothing. "Are you hurt?" he said to Celine. "No." "Miss Hale?" Vanessa was standing on the wet concrete in her stocking feet, arms crossed against the cold, her composure reconstructing itself with a speed that Celine found genuinely impressive. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady. "Remarkable, under the circumstances." Cassian looked at Lucien. Lucien looked back at him. 15 years of shared history passed between them in the silence, and whatever it contained, whatever weight it carried, it did not resolve into anything clean or simple. It just sat there between 2 men who had built something together and were now standing in the rain outside a building that was quietly destroying its own structural integrity, and everything was different. "Reeves," Celine said. "He's in a vehicle. South Access, you said." "Gone." Cassian's jaw was tight. 6 minutes on us." "He set the charges," she said. Not a question. "Or someone he called did." Cassian turned to Reeves, to the space where Reeves had been. She watched him absorb it, the adjustment, the recalibration, the specific quality of betrayal that comes not from being attacked by an enemy, but from discovering the person standing beside you was never quite who you understood them to be. She knew that feeling. She had just spent 5 years living adjacent to a different version of it. A second charge detonated from inside the building, farther north this time. The groan that followed was louder, longer, and accompanied by the sound of something large giving way somewhere in the upper structure. Everyone moved another 50 feet from the wall without being told. Celine pulled Cassian aside. 3 feet of distance from the nearest operative, which in Cassian's world was the equivalent of a private room. She said quietly and directly, "Lucien says it's Reeves. He has a communication log, 14 months of contact with a Vanek cutout. The pattern matches Reeves's travel schedule." Cassian said nothing. "He says he spent 8 weeks confirming it before he built this whole—" She stopped. Chose the word. "Situation. Because he couldn't brief you directly without Reeves knowing. He could have come to me himself. He says Reeves has eyes on your communications." Cassian's jaw moved. Once. The specific movement of a person biting down on a response they've decided not to give yet. "The log," he said. She handed him the document. He looked at it for 15 seconds. Not reading, she knew, but running the pattern against his own internal record, checking the dates against what he knew, the way a person cross-references not with another document but with their own memory of years. His face told her nothing. His hands, she noticed, were very still. "Where did Lucien get this?" he asked. "He hasn't said yet." "No." He handed it back. "He hasn't." He looked toward Lucien, who was standing 20 feet away speaking quietly to one of the field operatives. Or appearing to speak quietly, Celine corrected herself, because she was no longer willing to assume that anything Lucien did was simply what it appeared to be. "We take this back. We deal with it in a controlled environment." He looked at her. "All of it, including him. Reeves is in a vehicle with 6 minutes on us. My people are already running the south corridor." He reached into his jacket and produced his own phone, glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his expression. Not alarm, but the anticipation of alarm, which in Cassian looked like a sharpening. "Reeves's phone just came online. He made a call." "To who?" Cassian showed her the screen. The number the phone had flagged was a Vanek cutout, different from the one in the communication log, but from the same network architecture. His monitoring system had tagged it in real time. "He's reporting in," Celine said. "He's telling them the charges didn't complete, that we got out." Cassian put the phone away. "Which means Vanek is going to move to a contingency." "What's the contingency?" He looked at her directly. "You, directly. If they can't force the access through pressure on people around you, they move to direct acquisition." A pause. "They'll come for you personally." The rain had not let up. The terminal behind them continued its slow structural argument with gravity. Vanessa had accepted a jacket from one of the operatives and was standing near the vehicles with her arms wrapped around herself, watching everything with the eyes of someone who is actively reassessing every assumption they've ever made about the world they live in. Adrian's car appeared at the south access gate at that moment, Marcus at the wheel, Adrian in the passenger seat, the vehicle moving with the careful speed of someone who has been told to come fast, but not recklessly. It stopped 30 feet from the group, and both men got out. Adrian looked at the terminal, at the group, at Vanessa. He crossed directly to Vanessa, and she looked at him for a moment with an expression that contained several things simultaneously, none of them simple, and then he said, "Are you hurt?" And she said no. And he put his hand on her arm briefly, and neither of them said anything else, but something passed between them that Celine didn't examine because it wasn't hers to examine. Then Adrian turned and looked at Celine across the 20 feet of wet concrete between them. She looked back. He didn't say thank you. She didn't want him to. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who has seen something clearly for the first time in a long time, and finding the view both better and worse than he'd anticipated. "We have a problem," Cassian said, loudly enough for the group. Everyone turned. They moved to a secondary location, a warehouse 3 miles from the harbor that Cassian's organization used for exactly the kind of situation where you needed walls, controlled access, and time to think without the building you were in attempting to collapse. It was stripped down but functional, folding tables, monitors, a generator that hummed at a frequency you stopped noticing after 10 minutes. Celine stood at the center table with the communication log spread in front of her, Cassian on one side and Lucian on the other, and the rest of the room arranged around the three of them with the careful geometry of people who understood that the conversation happening at the center table was the only conversation that mattered right now. Marcus was in the corner with his laptop, running searches she hadn't asked him to run, but was glad he was running. Adrian was beside him, not contributing, not performing usefulness, just there, present, in the way of a person who has decided that being honest about what they don't know is the most they can offer, which was more than Celine had expected from him. "The log," Cassian said to Lucien. "Where did you get it?" Lucien's hands were on the table. He looked like a man who had made peace with this room, with this question, which was either the composure of innocence or the composure of a very long and very careful preparation. "I have an asset inside the Vanek financial operation," he said, "independent of the organization. My own cultivation, my own resource. 14 months, he paused. I didn't tell you about it because the asset's security depends on a small footprint." "You ran an independent intelligence operation," Cassian said. "Yes. Without my knowledge." "Yes." A pause. "I've done it before. It's never been an issue because it's never produced a result that affected us directly." He held Cassian's gaze. This time it did. The room was very quiet. Cassian's expression was the expression of a man holding several incompatible truths simultaneously and refusing to let any of them win prematurely. Celine knew the expression. She had seen it on his face 3 times in her life, at 3 moments of significant consequence, and each time what followed it had been a decision that was correct and costly in equal measure. "If the log is real," Cassian said, "then Reeves has been inside Vanek's network for over a year. And the architectural information he's passed constitutes a fundamental compromise of our financial infrastructure." He paused. "If the log is fabricated, if you constructed it to redirect suspicion from yourself, then you're the most dangerous person in this room." "Yes," Lucian said. "That's the situation. And you're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to verify." Lucian reached into his jacket. Both men in the room tensed, and he moved with extreme deliberateness, producing a small encrypted drive. He set it on the table. "The raw communications," unprocessed. Your own analysts can pull the metadata, the routing, the authentication keys. If any of it was constructed, your people will find the seams. He pushed the drive toward Cassian. Give me 6 hours. You don't have 6 hours, Celine said. Both men looked at her. Reeves has already reported to Vanek that we're alive and the terminal failed. They're moving to a direct acquisition attempt, against me, which means we have the time it takes them to organize and position, which is not 6 hours. She looked at Cassian. How long? Cassian looked at his phone. At the feed, his people were running on Vanek's known operational vehicles in the city. 2 hours, maybe 3. Then we have 2 hours to determine whether Lucian is telling the truth, locate Reeves, and position to intercept whatever Vanek is moving toward us. She looked at the table, at the drive, at the log, at all the pieces of a situation that had been constructed over months by at least one person in this room, and possibly 2. Give the drive to your analysts, right now. Run it against every verification method you have. She looked at Lucian. Where is your asset inside Vanek? I can reach them. Reach them. I want confirmation of the log from the source directly. Lucian pulled out his own phone, began composing a message. Celine turned to Marcus. What do you have? Marcus looked up from the laptop. Reeves. Daniel Reeves. Operational name, real name Daniel Cho, born 1981 in Portland. His financials, he paused, adjusted something on the screen. There's a property. Purchased 16 months ago through a trust. Rural, south of the city, 40 minutes. The trust is registered to a company that traces back 3 steps to a Vanek shell. He looked at her. He bought it right when the communications in that log started. A bolt hole. Everyone who does serious work builds a bolt hole. A place to run if the ground shifts, if the operation burns, if the thing you've been careful about for 14 months suddenly starts coming apart. Reeves had bought his with Vanek money, which meant Vanek knew where it was, which meant it wasn't as safe as he thought it was, which meant if they moved on it fast enough. He'll go there, Celine said. It's instinct. He thinks it's secure. It's 40 minutes out, Cassian said. 25 if we move now. Cassian looked at her for a beat. Then he turned to the room and began issuing instructions in the quiet, precise way she remembered. Not loud, never loud, just clear and absolute, and with the specific gravity of a man whose instructions had never once needed to be given twice. The room mobilized. Celine pulled on a jacket that someone handed her, checked the weight of the tactical vest she was still wearing from the terminal, looked at Adrian, who was standing at the edge of the activity, looking like a man who is watching a world operate that he has never seen before and is making rapid adjustments to his understanding of what is possible. Stay here, she said to him, with Marcus. Don't go outside. Celine, Adrian. She kept her voice even, but her eyes were direct. What's coming in the next few hours is not something you can help with. What you can do is stay alive and stay out of the way. Both of those things matter. She paused. Vanessa stays with you. He looked at her. His jaw worked. She could see him fighting the instinct to assert something, to offer something, to make himself useful in a situation where usefulness was not his to claim. Then he nodded, just once. Clean. Okay, he said. She turned away. She was almost at the door when she heard him say quietly, to no one in particular, she ran into that building for us. She didn't stop, but she heard it. The property was a farmhouse that had stopped being a farm 30 years ago and was now simply a structure, a main building, a detached garage, 40 acres of scrub and old field that backed up to a tree line. The driveway was a quarter-mile of dirt track, currently mud, the vehicle ruts deep enough to track which direction tires had most recently moved. Cassian's convoy stopped 200 yards from the main road access. They went in on foot, 6 of them, through the tree line on the east side. The rain had dropped to a cold mist. Their footsteps were quiet in the wet grass. Their breath steamed. Celine moved with them. She had not done this in 5 years. What she found, moving through the dark scrub of a field toward a farmhouse where a man who had sold her family's secrets was possibly sitting with whatever passed for his endgame, was that the body does not forget. The particular calibration of attention, the way the mind extends itself outward into space, reading shadow and sound, and the specific absence of movement where movement might be expected. She had been carrying all of it the entire time, the way you carry something you packed into a bag years ago and forgot about until the moment you need it. The garage light was on, a thin line of it under the door. Cassian stopped the advance with a single hand gesture. She stopped beside him. 6 people breathing controlled, shallow, in the dark. He pointed. 2 on the east side of the garage, 2 on the west. He and Celine on the front approach. They moved. The garage door was unlocked. The small lock on the side access door had been closed but not latched. The kind of small mistake made by a person operating under stress, moving fast, already in their mind somewhere else. Cassian pushed it open with one hand, the other at his side, and they came through. Reeves was inside. He was standing at a workbench along the far wall with his back to them, doing something with a laptop and a sat phone. He heard them come in, or felt it, the change in air, the quality of attention entering a space. And he went very still before he turned. He turned slowly. He was a compact man, which Celine had always noted, the kind of compact that contains more than its volume suggests. His broken nose, his gray temples, his eyes, which she had spent the drive over thinking about, the way they moved through spaces, the triangulated assessment she'd always read as tactical competence. She'd been right about the competence, wrong about who it served. "Celine," he said. Not Seraphine. Celine. "I wondered if it would be you or Cassian." "It's both," Cassian said from her left. Reeves looked at him. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, not regret. Something more complex, more weathered. The expression of someone who has arrived at a destination they've been traveling toward for a long time and finds it both exactly and nothing like they imagined. "How long?" Cassian asked. 14 months. No hesitation. "Since the Vanek approach." "They came to you." "Yes." "And you listened." "I listened," Reeves said, "and then I agreed." His voice was flat, not defiant, just direct, in the way of someone who is no longer managing anything. "I'm not going to tell you it was complicated, Cassian. It wasn't. They offered something, and I decided what I had was worth less than what they were offering." "What were they offering?" Celine asked. He looked at her. "Out," he said simply. "Full extraction, new identity. Enough money to build a life somewhere that doesn't run on what this life runs on." He looked between them. "I've been in this organization for 7 years. I have watched what it costs. I decided the cost was too high for me." A pause. "That's the whole story." The garage was cold. The laptop on the workbench was still open, its screen casting a pale rectangle of light across the tool-hung wall behind it. "The architectural information you passed," Celine said. "The financial routing, the trust structures." "Yes." "All of it?" "Enough of it." A pause. "Not everything. I didn't give them the core authentication keys. I was pulling back from the deal, the last 3 months." His jaw tightened. "Vanek stopped trusting me when I started slowing down. They put the terminal operation together without my input. I didn't know about the charges." "But you knew about the abduction," Cassian said. "I knew they were moving on Vanessa Hale. I didn't know the details." He looked at Celine. "I didn't know they were going to wire the building. If I had—" "Stop," she said, quietly. "Don't tell me what you would have done differently. It doesn't change anything." He stopped. The silence was the silence of a room that has reached the end of a particular road. Cassian's phone vibrated. He glanced at it. His expression shifted. A fraction, a degree, but she caught it, the way she always caught it. "What?" she said. He showed her the screen. A message from the analyst running the encrypted drive. 4 lines, concise. The language of someone who delivers technical conclusions without interpretation. Log authenticated. Metadata clean. Routing architecture verified against Vanek network map. Source is legitimate. The log was real. Which meant Lucian had been telling the truth. Which meant the variable she had been holding in suspension, the question she hadn't been able to resolve, had just collapsed into an answer, and the answer reorganized everything. She looked at Reeves. "Vanek's direct acquisition move, the contingency after the terminal. When does it deploy?" Reeves looked at her steadily. He was calculating. She could see it, the specific look of a person running options, weighing what they have left to trade. "An hour," he said. "Maybe less. They have a team already positioned in the city." A pause. "I can give you the contact protocol, the operational frequency, everything you need to intercept it." He held her gaze. In exchange for the offer Vanek made me. Extraction, identity, money. His eyes moved to Cassian. I know you can do it. I've seen you do it for other people. Cassian said nothing. Celine looked at her brother. He was looking at Reeves with the expression she had seen only a handful of times. The expression that meant he was holding something down that would, if he released it, change the temperature of the room in a way that couldn't be undone. Give us the protocol, she said to Reeves. Give us everything, right now. Reeves reached slowly into his jacket, produced a folded paper, held it out. She took it. She looked at it. The operational frequency. A location. A staging point on the city's west side. A timeline that confirmed his estimate. The Vanek team was already in position, already counting down to a window that was now 45 minutes away, targeted at a woman they believed they could use to crack open the most protected financial architecture on the East Coast. She folded it, put it in her vest pocket. Cassian, she said. I was still looking at Reeves. Cassian. Her voice was steady. We need to move. He looked at her, then back at Reeves. Then he made the decision. She watched him make it, watched the thing inside him that wanted a different resolution get set aside, deliberately, for the second time that night. He pulled out zip ties, handed them to the operative on his right. Secure him. Stay with him. He looked at Reeves one last time. We'll discuss your terms when there's time to discuss them properly. Reeves nodded. He held out his wrists. They left him in the garage and moved back through the wet scrub to the vehicles, fast now, 45 minutes collapsing toward 40, and the city ahead of them lit up against the low cloud like something that didn't know yet what was coming for it. Celine was already on the phone as she ran. Marcus, listen carefully. I need you to move Adrian and Vanessa to the secondary safe location, not the warehouse. The third location, the one Cassian registered under the Luxembourg entity last year. Do it right now. Do not stop for anything, and do not tell anyone where you're going until you're inside. What's happening? Marcus said. Vanek has a team positioned in the city, and they have a 45-minute window. She reached the vehicle, pulled the door. They're coming for me, and I'm going to let them. A pause on his end. I'm going to let them think they have me. She got in. The door closed. Cassian was already in the front, the vehicle already moving. And then we're going to end this. The convoy accelerated into the dark. And in the warehouse across the city, Adrian Voss stood up from the folding chair where he'd been sitting for the last hour and looked at Marcus and said, Where are we going? Somewhere safe, Marcus said, closing the laptop. And Celine? Marcus looked at him. He picked up his jacket. Toward the danger, he said, same as she's always done. We just never knew it. The staging point was a parking structure on the city's west side. 4 levels, partially occupied, the kind of anonymous urban infrastructure that exists in every city as a backdrop to things that don't want to be seen. The Vanek team had taken the 3rd level, which gave them sight lines in 3 directions and a clear exit route to the highway access 2 blocks east. Celine knew all of this because the operational frequency Reeves had given them carried enough traffic, if you knew how to listen to it, to reconstruct the full deployment in under 20 minutes. Cassian's signals person had done it in 14. She stood at the base of the structure's east stairwell with Cassian on her left and Declan on her right, and 4 more people behind her, and she was wearing a wire that would transmit everything to a federal contact Cassian had used 3 times in 12 years. A woman named Agent Petra Hulse, whose relationship with the Draven organization existed in the complicated space between professional adversity and mutual pragmatic respect. Hulse had been briefed in 30 seconds. She had asked 2 questions. She had said, "Give me 20 minutes to position." She had hung up. That had been 18 minutes ago. "They're expecting you to come in scared," Cassian said. His voice was very low. "Running. Thinking they've cornered you." "I know what they're expecting. You need to give them enough of it to commit to the approach before Hulse's people can cash in." She looked at him. "I know." He looked back at her. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen there in a long time. Not fear. Cassian didn't do fear in any recognizable form, but something adjacent to it. Something that was about her specifically and not the operation. "I should be the one going in," he said. "They don't want you. They want me." She checked the wire, pressed the small receiver deeper into her ear. The moment they have Cassian Draven in a controlled environment, they stop negotiating and start executing. They want the financial architecture, and they believe I'll trade it to stay alive. She paused. Let them believe it a little longer. He looked at her for another second. Then he looked away, which was the closest he was going to get to accepting a plan he didn't like. Hals's people are on the second level, Declan said quietly, reading from his phone. 4 agents. She's running 2 more in vehicles on the street exits. When they move, Celine said, they move fast. I don't want a standoff. I want it over before anyone decides to take a shot they can't take back. Understood. She rolled her shoulders once, checked the weight of the vest. The wire was a thin strip against her sternum, the transmitter the size of a thumbnail taped just above her left hip. She was not carrying a weapon, which was a decision she had made deliberately, and that Cassian had argued against, and that she had overruled because walking into a room where you are supposed to be a terrified civilian with a tactical weapon changes every calculation in the room the moment anyone finds it. She went up the stairs. The 3rd level smelled like motor oil and concrete dust and the specific cold of enclosed urban space in November. There were 8 vehicles scattered across the level, none of them occupied. The Vanek team, 5 men, she had counted from the frequency traffic, had positioned at the north end near the ramp access, with sight lines to both stairwells. She walked out of the east stairwell and into their sight lines and kept walking. They let her get 20 feet in before the man nearest to her stepped out from between 2 parked vehicles and said, "Stop there." She stopped. He was large, Eastern European features, the flat affect of someone who has done this kind of work long enough that it no longer produces any particular feeling. He was holding a phone, not a weapon, which told her the first contact was meant to be transactional. "You came alone," he said. "You asked for me alone. We asked for you to come to the terminal alone. You brought an army." "The terminal had explosives in the walls." She kept her voice even. "Try not to take it personally." He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not humor, but a recognition of a quality he hadn't anticipated and was recalibrating for. "Where's your brother?" "Not here." "We'll need confirmation. You'll need to decide in the next 30 seconds whether you're running this as a negotiation or as something else," she said, "because if it's something else, we're both wasting time we don't have." She looked at him directly. "I know what you want. The authentication keys for the financial routing, the trust structure underneath the logistics network, the core architecture." She paused. "I also know that what you have to offer me is my continued existence, which is a currency I'm interested in." She let that settle. "So let's talk." He studied her. She held still under it, held the specific stillness of a woman who is not performing calm, but is operating from a place deep enough that calm is simply what the surface looks like. He spoke into his phone in clipped, accented sentences. A pause. Then he gestured toward the north end of the level, toward the ramp where the other 4 men were positioned. She walked toward them. The man running the operation was leaning against the hood of a black SUV with the posture of someone who has been comfortable with authority for long enough that it no longer requires performance. He was 50 or so, silver at his temples, a scar along his jaw that had healed clean. He looked like a banker, which she suspected was intentional. "Seraphine Draven," he said, with the satisfaction of someone completing a sentence they've been composing for a while. "You have me at a disadvantage," she said. "Kovac," he said. "Victor Kovac. I run Vanek's Western operations." He looked at her with the focused attention of a man assessing a commodity. "You've been difficult to locate. 5 years. That's a long time to stay hidden." "I had motivation." "You had a husband who didn't know who he was married to." He said it without cruelty, just as fact. "We knew before he did, for what it's worth. We've known where you were for 2 years. A pause. "We chose to wait." She didn't let the information land on her face, processed it internally, filed it, kept her expression at a neutral she had been practicing since childhood. Why? Because taking Seraphine Draven without leverage is a provocation. Taking her with leverage, he spread his hands slightly, is a negotiation. And the divorce was the leverage. The divorce was a gift, he said. We didn't manufacture it. Your husband did that on his own. He almost smiled. Though we did help it along in terms of timing, the clerk was cooperative. The wire was transmitting. She was aware of it as a steady, anchoring fact. Everything Kovac said was going to Hals's receiver, was being recorded, was building the kind of case that took years to construct in normal circumstances and was currently being assembled in real time. She kept her breathing even, kept her hands still at her sides. "The clerk is the least of it," she said. "You've had an asset inside the Draven organization for 14 months. Kovac's expression shifted slightly. "Reeves was a professional arrangement. Reeves is currently zip-tied in a garage 40 minutes south of the city." She watched his face, watched the calculation running. "Whatever he told you about the financial architecture, it's incomplete. He didn't have the core authentication keys. He gave you the corridors, but not the rooms." She paused. "I have the rooms." "Then we have something to discuss." "We do." She took one step toward him. "But before we discuss it, I need you to understand something." Her voice was steady, unhurried, the voice of a woman who is not operating from fear and has not been from the moment she walked up those stairs. "I came here alone because I chose to. Not because you cornered me. Not because I'm out of options." She held his gaze. "I came here because I want this to end, and the cleanest way to end it is to have this conversation in a place where everyone can hear it." Kovac went very still. "Everyone," he repeated. "The federal agent on the second level," she said. "The two vehicles on the street exits. And my brother, who is not as far away as I told your man at the stairs." She watched the calculation behind his eyes accelerate. "The wire is running. Everything you've said is already recorded." A pause. "Victor Kovac. Victor Kovac running Vonnex Western Operations. 14 months of architectural intelligence through an asset named Reeves. A staged abduction at the Callaway terminal with explosive charges set on load-bearing columns." She let the list sit. "That's a significant case." The silence on the third level of that parking structure had a particular texture. Cold air, the distant sound of the city, 5 men and 1 woman, and the specific suspended quality of a moment that has not yet resolved into what it's going to be. Kovac's right hand moved. And Agent Petra Hals came through the west stairwell door with 3 agents behind her and said, clearly and without drama, "Victor Kovac, federal agents, keep your hands where I can see them." What followed was not clean. Nothing like this is ever clean. Kovac's man on the far left made a decision that lasted approximately 2 seconds before Declan came through the east stairwell and removed the decision from him with the economical efficiency of someone who has resolved situations like this many times and has strong views on doing it quickly. The man nearest to Celine reached for her arm, reflex, the instinct to retain leverage when everything else is collapsing. And she stepped inside his reach and used the leverage of his own forward motion against him in a way that put him on the concrete floor in under 3 seconds, which surprised him considerably more than it surprised her. Kovac himself didn't move. He stood with his hands visible and his jaw tight, and his eyes on Celine with an expression that contained something she hadn't expected. Not rage, not fear, but a kind of sharp, reluctant appraisal. The look of a man who has just realized he fundamentally misread the situation, and is experienced enough to know exactly how rare it is to misread a situation this completely. "You came here to burn us," he said, while Hals's people were securing his team. "I came here to end it," she said. "Those aren't always the same thing." Halsa reached Kovac and produced handcuffs, which she applied with the brisk neutrality of someone who does this frequently and finds it neither satisfying nor dramatic. She looked at Celine briefly over Kovac's shoulder, a look that was professional, measured, and contained, very briefly, something almost like acknowledgement. "We'll need a statement," Halsey said. "You'll have it." Halsey nodded, moved on. Celine stood in the middle of the third level as Hals's team worked around her, and she breathed, and the adrenaline began its slow recession, and she felt, underneath it, the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has been running at full capacity for 16 hours on no sleep and considerable emotional expenditure. Cashin appeared at the east stairwell. He looked at the scene, at her, at Kovac being walked toward the stairwell. He came to stand beside her and said nothing for a moment, which was the most eloquent thing he could have offered. "The wire worked," she said. "The wire worked," he confirmed. "Halsey will need access to the communication logs, the Reeves material. I'll have it to her by morning." She nodded. She was watching Kovac being walked away. He turned, just once, and looked back at her over his shoulder with the expression she'd seen on his face when she'd told him about the wire, that reluctant, precise appraisal. "She walked in alone," he said to no one in particular, or perhaps to the air, or perhaps to whatever accounting he kept of situations that didn't go the way he planned them. Then he was through the door. Cassian put his hand on her shoulder, briefly. His hand was large and warm, and she leaned into it for exactly 2 seconds before she straightened. "Lucien," she said, "at the warehouse." A pause. "We need to talk about Lucien." "I know." "Not tonight." "No," she agreed. "Not tonight." She found Adrian at the third location, a clean, unremarkable apartment in a mid-rise building registered under a name that connected to nothing if you didn't know where to look. Sitting at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't drunk, his jacket draped over the back of the chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up in the way she'd seen 1,000 times across 1,000 mornings that she was only now fully placing in the past. Marcus was at the window. Vanessa was on the couch, asleep, genuinely asleep. The sleep of someone whose body has simply decided that it has absorbed enough for one day and is closing the account whether the mind agrees or not. Her feet were tucked under her and someone had put a blanket over her shoulders. And in sleep her face had shed all its social architecture and was simply a face, tired and ordinary and human. Adrian looked up when Celine came in. He looked at her face, at the vest, at the way she was carrying herself. The specific post-action quality that people who have never been in those situations don't recognize but that Marcus recognized, and that Adrian was apparently now recognizing for the first time, the recognition producing something in his expression that moved through him visibly before he contained it. "It's over?" he asked. "The immediate part." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The exhaustion was considerable now, settling into her joints, her shoulders, the back of her neck. She let herself feel it because there was no longer a reason not to. "Kovac is in federal custody. His team. The case is... it's significant. Halsey will run it for months, maybe longer, but the threat to the network is contained. And Reeves? Still in the garage." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to her face. "He'll be extracted in the morning. Cassian will determine what his cooperation is worth." A pause. "He may actually get what he asked for, if his testimony holds." Adrian looked at his coffee. "And Lucien?" "Lucien," she said carefully, "did something that caused significant harm in the way it was executed and was driven by a correct analysis of the threat. Those two things are both true and both have to be dealt with." She looked at the table. "That's for Cassian to navigate, not me." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been sitting here," he said, "for the last 2 hours trying to figure out what to say to you." His voice was lower than usual. Something had come off it, the particular resonance that men like him develop over years of boardrooms and negotiations, the calibrated authority. What was left underneath was just a voice. "And I keep coming up empty, which is..." He stopped. "That hasn't happened to me a lot. You don't need to say anything tonight, Adrian." "I know." He looked up at her. "I want to." She waited. He turned the coffee cup slowly, both hands around it, not looking at it. "I've been thinking about that dinner, the Hargrove thing, 2 years ago." He said it without preamble, without framing, which told her it had been sitting at the front of his mind rather than requiring excavation. "What I said about your ordinary life, before all this." He stopped. "I was performing, for a room full of people whose opinion I cared about more than..." He stopped again. "More than me," she said, not cruelly, just completing the sentence because it was already there. "Yes." He held her gaze. "And you heard it." "I heard it. And you didn't leave." "I thought about it," she said honestly. "But I'd already made a decision about what I wanted. And what I wanted, not my family's, not my name, not any of it. And I thought..." She paused. She was tired, and the tiredness was making her more honest than she might otherwise have been, which was either a liability or something else. "I thought you'd see me eventually, the actual me, under all the things you decided I was. I thought if I was patient enough..." "I didn't," he said. "No." The kitchen was very quiet. Marcus had stepped out somewhere in the last few minutes, which was either coincidence or the kind of discretion that comes from working closely with a person for a long time. "I'm not asking for anything," Adrian said. "I need you to know that. I'm not... This isn't me trying to..." He set the coffee cup down. "I just need to say it to your face, directly, without an audience, because I think you deserve that at minimum." He looked at her steadily. "You were extraordinary, every day, in the ways I was too stupid and too busy performing my own importance to see. The way you moved through rooms full of people who treated you like furniture. The way you never asked me to be better and never stopped hoping I would be anyway." His jaw worked. "I wasted 5 years of your life." "You wasted 5 years of your own life," she said. "I was building something the whole time. You just didn't know what it was." He looked at her. "I was building the woman who walked into that parking structure tonight," she said quietly, "who came back to a family she left because someone needed her to, not because she was called back, who sat across from a man who sold her brother's secrets and decided what was true and what wasn't, and acted on it inside of 5 minutes. She looked at her own hands on the table. "I built that in those 5 years. In the quiet. In the ordinary Tuesday dinners and the farmer's market flowers and the paperback novels." She looked up at him. "You didn't waste my time, Adrian. You gave me a place to become something you never expected." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for what I'm losing, for what I did." She believed him. That was the thing she hadn't expected and couldn't entirely account for. She believed him, and the belief didn't change anything and wasn't meant to. But it mattered in the small interior way that honest things matter even when they arrive too late to alter any outcome. "I know," she said. She stood up. He didn't move to stop her, which was right. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and looked at Vanessa asleep on the couch and thought, she's going to have things to figure out too. A man she loves in a different way than she thought, in a life that just revealed its full dimensions. That's its own kind of reckoning. At the door she turned. "Start over," she said to Adrian. Not as a command, as a statement of what she saw as possible. "You have the intelligence for it. You have the work ethic. You were just pointed at the wrong things." She looked at him steadily. "Point them at something that doesn't need you to perform. Something that needs you to actually show up." A pause. "You'd be surprised what you're capable of when you stop worrying about who's watching." She left. The months that followed moved the way recovery always does. Not in a straight line, not cleanly, but with the uneven, sometimes brutal rhythm of things genuinely rebuilding rather than performing recovery. Hals's federal case expanded, as Celine had known it would, into a full investigation of Vanek's Western operations. Victor Kovac cooperated partially and grudgingly after 6 weeks, when his organization's financial infrastructure had been frozen extensively enough that cooperation became the more rational option. 3 of his operational lieutenants followed. The case, which had begun as a single night's wire recording in a parking structure, became something Hals would spend the better part of 18 months building into the most significant organized crime prosecution the Eastern District had attempted in a decade. Reeves, Daniel Cho, was extracted from the farmhouse garage on a Tuesday morning and held in a location Cashin controlled for 9 days, while the terms of his testimony were negotiated through channels that didn't exist on paper. He testified. His testimony was specific, detailed, and damaging, and it was delivered with the flat effect of a man who has made his peace with the transaction and is executing it without drama. In exchange, he received the extraction he'd been promised, and a life that was small and distant and entirely his own, which was what he had wanted all along, in the way that wanting something without being willing to pay an honest price for it tends to produce the kind of damage he had produced. Lucien was the longest reckoning. Cashin spent 3 weeks with the documentation, the drive, the communication logs, and whatever conversation he and Lucien had behind closed doors, which Celine was not present for and did not ask about. At the end of it, Lucien remained within the organization's structure in a reduced capacity, with a specifically narrowed scope of authority and a monitoring arrangement that Lucien accepted with the equanimity of a man who understood he was receiving something rather than having something taken away. He was not forgiven, exactly. He was not expelled. He existed in the complicated space between those two things, which was perhaps the most accurate place for him, because what he had done had been both a betrayal of process and a protection of the thing the process was built to serve, and those two truths sat uncomfortably beside each other without resolving. Celine didn't try to resolve them. She filed them. The Draven organization's transformation into Draven International, a legitimate security, logistics, and financial consultancy with registered offices in New York, Luxembourg, and Singapore, took 11 months of legal work, structural restructuring, and the kind of patient, methodical dismantling of what the organization had been in order to build what it was becoming. It was not romantic work. It was the opposite of romantic. It was paperwork and regulatory filings and conversations with lawyers and accountants and compliance officers who had no idea what the organization had previously been and didn't need to. It was Celine at a desk at 7 in the morning and at 10 at night, building something out of a history that had been built on other foundations, which required knowing which walls to keep and which to take apart and where to pour new concrete. Cassian helped more than she'd expected him to. He was, she discovered, better at letting go than his history suggested. Or perhaps he had simply been waiting, for longer than either of them had acknowledged, for something worth letting go toward. He took a position on the board. Advisory, non-executive. He showed up for the meetings and gave his opinion and went home, which was in Connecticut now, on the water, a house he'd bought and furnished with the care of a man discovering that he enjoys having somewhere to be that doesn't require him to be anything in particular. They had dinner twice a month. They argued about things that weren't important. He criticized her management decisions, and she told him he didn't know what he was talking about, and he did know what he was talking about, and she took his advice approximately 40% of the time, and both of them knew that was the right percentage. She missed him, she realized, even when she was sitting across the table from him. She had been missing him for 5 years without knowing that was what the feeling was. Adrian Voss did not rebuild what he'd had. He didn't try to. He sold the penthouse, took less than market value because he wanted it gone, not maximized, and moved into a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood he would previously not have considered, and for 3 months he existed in the particular formless space of a man who has had his architecture removed and has not yet decided what he's building instead. Then he started working. Not deals, not real estate. He connected with a community development organization that had been trying to rebuild 3 blocks of a neighborhood that had been gutted by a combination of predatory lending and neglect. And he brought to it the only things he actually had left: a detailed understanding of how financial structures work and a phone full of contacts who, even now, would take his call. He was not good at it immediately. He made mistakes that someone more experienced wouldn't have made, and he was corrected by people who were 20 years younger than him and considerably more knowledgeable about the specific terrain, and he accepted the corrections without performing grace about them, which was harder than it sounds. Marcus stayed with him. This surprised Adrian more than almost anything else that had happened, and when he asked Marcus about it, Marcus said, "You're more interesting now than you were before." And Adrian laughed for the first time in several months, genuinely and without effort. Vanessa moved on. It was not acrimonious and it was not clean. It was 2 people who had been building something together discovering that what they'd been building was contingent on conditions that no longer existed, and making the decision, mutually and without drama, to stop. She went to Paris for 6 months and came back with a different kind of quiet around her, the kind that comes from having thought about something long and hard and arrived at conclusions you can live with. She and Celine crossed paths once at an industry event 7 months after everything. They stood near a drinks table and made conversation for 4 minutes, and it was the kind of conversation that exists in the space between what has been said and what doesn't need to be. And at the end of it, Vanessa said, "You didn't have to come that night." And Celine said, "Yes, I did." And Vanessa nodded slowly and moved away, and there was nothing incomplete about the exchange. The rooftop was Celine's choice, and she hadn't planned to choose it consciously. She'd simply found herself there one evening in the second spring after everything, standing at the railing with the city spread below her and the last of the sunset pulling its light off the western buildings. And she'd heard the door open behind her and known without turning who it was. Adrian stopped 10 feet back from the railing. He had learned, somewhere in the intervening months, not to fill space just because it was available. She turned. He looked different. Not younger. Older, actually, in the way that losing things you shouldn't have been carrying can make a person look when the weight is finally gone. He was wearing a jacket that didn't cost what his jackets used to cost, and had a smear of something on the cuff that he either hadn't noticed or had noticed and decided wasn't important, and both possibilities seemed equally likely. "I heard about the Luxembourg registration," he said. "Draven International. It's in the trade press." "We're in most of the trade press now," she said. "Legally, which continues to be novel." He almost smiled. She almost returned it. "The community project," she said. "The Halden blocks. Marcus sent me the filing." He shouldn't have. He knew I'd want to see it. She looked at him. "It's good work." "It's a start." He put his hands in his pockets. The city behind him was shifting into its evening mode, lights coming on in the vertical stacks of buildings that she had watched from so many angles for so many years. I'm not here for anything," he said. "I know you probably assumed that. He stopped. "I wanted to say it in person, that you were right, about pointing things at something that doesn't need an audience." He looked at her steadily. "You were right about most of it, actually." "I know," she said, not unkindly. He nodded. He looked out at the city for a moment, the way people look at cities when they're thinking about everything they've done in them and what any of it adds up to. "I stopped being your wife," she said quietly, "the day you stopped seeing me." She had said it before, or something like it, but saying it here, in this light, at this distance, it landed differently than it had in conference rooms and through phone lines, and in the various amplified stages of a life coming apart. It landed like something that simply was. "I know," he said. They stood for a moment in the particular companionship of two people who have been through something together and come out the other side, changed in directions that no longer converge, which is not the same as hostility and is not the same as indifference, and is something that doesn't have a clean name but doesn't need one. Then she heard the helicopter. She'd asked for it at 7. It was 7. Whatever else had changed, Cassian's operational punctuality had not. She picked up her bag from the railing, looked at Adrian one more time, looked at him the way she'd rarely let herself look at him in 5 years of marriage, directly and without the management of expression that proximity requires, just fully and honestly. He looked back. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he said. She walked toward the landing pad on the upper level. The rotor noise was building now, filling the evening air with the particular sound that had marked the moment, months ago, when everything changed in a courthouse plaza in front of every camera in the city. She didn't look back, not because there was nothing there. There was something there, some residue of 5 years and everything they'd cost and everything she'd built inside them, but because what was ahead was larger and cleaner and entirely hers in a way that nothing had been hers for a long time. The helicopter touched down. She climbed in. The city fell away below her as they lifted. The buildings, the lights, the streets that held the history of the last 18 months. Like water holds what's been dissolved in it, invisibly and completely. She watched it through the window until it was just light against the dark, and then just the dark. And she breathed, and she was not the woman who had walked out of a courthouse in the rain accepting an old necklace as severance. And she was not the woman who had lived quietly in someone else's shadow for 5 years. And she was not even quite the woman who had walked into a parking structure alone with a wire and a plan. She was something that had come through all of those women. She reached up and touched the silver necklace at her throat, the one she'd taken from the conference room table, the only thing she'd accepted. She'd worn it every day since, not as a reminder of what she'd lost, as a marker of the moment she'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to see her and had simply begun, again, to see herself. The helicopter carried her north, toward the skyline's edge, toward the water and the dark and everything that came next. Below her, on a rooftop, a man stood at a railing and watched it go. He stood there for a long time. Then he put his collar up against the cold and went back inside. And the city absorbed him the way cities absorb everything, completely, without ceremony, moving always forward into whatever morning comes next.